March the 18th, 1915, the Dardanelles. 16 Allied battleships, the greatest fleet ever sent against the Ottoman Empire, steam into the strait, guns trained on the road to Constantinople. London expects the city to fall within weeks. By sunset, a third of those great ships will be sunk or crippled. This is Gallipoli, 8 months that broke an armada, forged nations, and changed the century. To understand why, look east. By the winter of 1914, the Western Front had frozen into deadlock from the sea to Switzerland. Russia, fighting for her life, appealed to her allies for help, but every sea road to Russia was shut. The Baltic was German. The Black Sea lay behind the Dardanelles. A narrow Ottoman strait, the only channel through which Allied supplies could reach her southern ports. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, proposed a way around the trenches. Force the strait with old battleships, seize Constantinople, open the sea road to Russia, and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war in a single stroke. The Ottomans had spent months preparing. 10 lines of mines barred the strait below the Narrows, covered by forts and mobile howitzers on both shores. For weeks, Allied minesweepers crept forward under fire and were driven back. Then, on the night of March the 7th, the small mine layer Nusret slipped down the Asian shore and laid one final line. 26 mines in Erin Kewi Bay, parallel to the beach, exactly where the great ships turned. On March the 18th, the fleet attacked in full strength. At 2 o'clock, the French battleship Bouvet, turning through the bay, struck a mine and was gone in 2 minutes. 600 men with her. By dusk, Irresistible and Ocean had followed her down, and 3 more ships limped away crippled. A third of the fleet lost in a single afternoon. The Navy would not come again. If the Navy could not force the strait, the Army would take the peninsula that commanded it. General Sir Ian Hamilton gathered 78,000 men, Britons, French, Indians, and the untested Australia and New Zealand Army Corps, the Anzacs. At dawn on April the 25th, they would storm 5 beaches around Cape Helles, while the Anzacs landed 13 miles north, near Gaba Tepe, to cut the peninsula in 2, and the French fainted at Kum Calais, on the Asian shore. The first great opposed landing of the modern age against defenders who had been given a month to dig. Before dawn on the 25th, the Anzacs came ashore, a mile north of where they were meant to be. Instead of open ground, they faced a maze of ravines, climbing to the ridge of Sari Bair. As they scrambled upward, one Ottoman officer grasped what was at stake. Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal, commanding the 19th Division, marched his 57th Regiment to the heights with an order that became legend.
I do not order you to attack. I order you to die. In the time it takes us to die, other troops and commanders can take our place.
By nightfall, the Anzacs clung to a beachhead barely a mile deep. They would hold that line, and little more, for 8 months. At Cape Helles, the sea ran red. At V Beach, troops poured from the Collier River, Clyde straight into machine gun fire. At W Beach, the Lancashire Fusiliers won 6 Victoria Crosses before breakfast. The beaches held, barely. 4 miles inland waited the village of Krithia, under the hill of Achi Baba. 3 times that spring the Allies attacked it. 3 times they were hurled back with terrible loss. The lines hardened into trench, wire, and parapet, until the tip of Gallipoli looked exactly like the Western Front. Everyone had hoped to escape. In May, it was the Ottomans' turn. Before dawn on the 19th, 42,000 men rose from the dark and charged the Anzac line, and the attack broke against massed rifles and machine guns. By mid-morning, some 10,000 Ottoman soldiers lay dead or wounded between the trenches. The dead could not be left. On May the 24th, the 2 sides agreed a truce, and for 9 hours Anzac and Ottoman burial parties worked side by side in no man's land, trading cigarettes and tobacco. Enemies for a month looked each other in the face and found respect. Through the summer, London sent fresh divisions for one last throw. While Lone Pine and the Neck pinned the defenders, at the Neck, 4 waves of Australian light horsemen rose into the guns in 15 minutes. 2 columns would march north out of Anzac by night, climb the ravines, and take the crest of Bair by dawn. Behind them, a whole new army would land at Suvla Bay against a handful of defenders. But the night march drowned in the gullies, and dawn found the columns short of every summit. At Suvla, the landing succeeded, then stopped on the beach, while the empty hills above filled, hour by hour, with Ottoman reserves. One summit fell. At dawn on August the 8th, New Zealanders took the crest of Chunuk Bair. From the top, they could see the Narrows themselves, the waters the whole campaign was for. No other Allied soldiers ever would. For 2 days, they held the Bair crest under fire that destroyed battalion after battalion. Then, before dawn on the 10th, Mustafa Kemal, now commanding the whole sector, led the counter-attack in person, and the Ottoman wave swept the summit clear. The high watermark of Gallipoli had passed. The stalemate closed in again. Autumn brought crueler enemies than bullets. Dysentery, born on the flies of summer, had hollowed out both armies. Now came the cold. In late November, a 3-day storm drowned men in their flooded trenches, then froze the survivors at their posts. 16,000 cases of frostbite and exposure. In London, the question quietly changed. No longer how to win, but how to leave. General Monro, sent out to judge, recommended evacuation. Kitchener came, saw the beaches for himself, and agreed. Gallipoli would be abandoned. If an army could somehow vanish from a shore the enemy overlooked. Everyone expected the evacuation to be a massacre. The planners braced for the loss of 1/3 of the force. Instead, Gallipoli ended with its one flawless operation. Night after night through December, the trenches at Anzac and Suvla quietly thinned. Rifles rigged to fire by dripping water kept up the show. Men walked to the piers on blanketed paths in silence. On the last night, the final rearguard slipped away, and the Ottoman army woke to empty trenches. Anzac and Suvla cost not a single life. Hells in January, the same. More than 100,000 men spirited off an open shore without one casualty. 8 months had cost 250,000 casualties on each side, Ottoman and Allied, almost exactly alike, the dead of a dozen nations lying within meters of one another. Yet from this defeat, nations date their birth. For Australia and New Zealand, April the 25th became Anzac Day. For the Ottomans, Gallipoli was the last great victory of a dying empire and the making of Mustafa Kemal. Within a decade, founder of the Turkish Republic, Ataturk. In 1934, words of reconciliation attributed to him were inscribed above Anzac Cove.
Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us, where they lie side by side, here in this country of ours. Your mothers, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace.
Historians still debate those words. On this shore, it does not matter.